It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a simple sentence, spoken as fact. You're unimportant without a paycheck. Sarah had heard it 1,000 times before, but today, it hit different. She stood frozen, clutching the mug she'd never tasted, her thoughts swarming like a storm. Across from her, Daniel, her husband of over 2 decades, tapped away on his phone, unbothered. Her chest tightened, but no tears came. Not this time. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. Sarah stood at the edge of the kitchen island, her fingers curling around the handle of the ceramic mug she hadn't taken a sip from in 10 minutes. Daniel sat across from her, not even looking up as he tapped figures into his phone, skimming their monthly expenses like a CEO conducting layoff. His voice was flat, unbothered, as he repeated the phrase that would lodge in her chest for days. You're useless without a paycheck. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a fight. It was worse. It was casual. Sarah felt her throat close slightly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The air around them seemed to constrict, pulling the walls in closer. Her eyes searched his face, looking for some trace of humor, of softness, of the man she once clung to during thunderstorms and danced with barefoot on linoleum floors. But his gaze stayed glued to the screen. She turned away, pretending to check the oven timer even though dinner was long done. She could still smell the roast chicken, her grandmother's recipe. The table was set, napkins folded, candles lit. She'd done all the usual things to make the night feel comforting. And yet here it was, a single sentence unraveling years of invisible labor. Daniel, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. What? He glanced up, his expression impatient, like a man too busy to edit his cruelty. Do you really think that? She asked. That I'm useless? He sighed. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying, we're carrying everything on my income. It's reality, Sarah. You haven't worked in years. The word reality struck her like a slap, as if what she'd done, the birthdays planned, the crises managed, the holidays prepared down to the napkin rings, didn't count, as if the sleepless nights with sick kids and the careful budgeting in the 25 years of emotional glue she poured into the cracks of their lives had simply evaporated. She stepped toward the sink, gripping the counter with both hands. Her reflection stared back at her in the window. Her face had changed. Not old, just different, more tired, more quiet. She had disappeared somewhere along the way, hadn't she? A slow anger started at the base of her spine and traveled upward. Her hands steadied. Her breath came deeper now. I supported this family, Daniel, she said finally, turning to face him. Maybe not with a paycheck, but with every part of who I was. He didn't respond, just looked away. That silence told her everything. She thought about her friends, Margot, who went back to school at Tanya, who started baking and now ran her own online business. She'd listened to their stories for years, always proud of them, always cheering them on, but never imagining herself in the same frame. Now she did. The insult didn't break her. It sparked her. She placed her untouched mug in the sink. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Something inside her had shifted like the click of a lock opening. She looked at Daniel, not with tears, but with clarity. Then without another word, she walked down the hall passing framed photos of birthdays and vacations, milestones she'd built from scratch. She paused at the door to the spare room, the one Daniel called junk storage. Not anymore, she thought. She opened it slowly, flipped on the light, and stared at the clutter. Old books, forgotten paints, her sewing machine gathering dust in the corner. A forgotten room, just like her. But not for much longer. Sarah closed the door behind her, heart pounding. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew the first step. She would not be invisible anymore. And Daniel's words, they wouldn't be the end of her story. They would be the beginning. The more I thought about it, the more I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving something to myself. Sarah woke early the next morning, the insult echoing through the quiet dawn. You're useless without a paycheck. It vibrated in her chest like a challenge. She slid out of bed and padded silently down the hall to the spare room she had hesitated to enter before. She flicked on the light and opened her journal. The first 2 pages were titled Dreams. I landed the art scholarship. Opened my boutique. Start a design studio. Each was crossed out, annotated, buried. Her journals lay stacked with notebooks from years past. She selected one at random, tore out a page and began calculating. She logged into her bank account and discovered something she had forgotten: her personal savings. Modest but steady. Tears pricked her eyes, not from grief, but from recognition. She still had something. She still mattered. Sunlight crept through the blinds. As she walked to her kitchen, she found a real estate flyer tucked among the bills. Downtown office building for sale. It was the same building Daniel's company rented. Blocky brick facade, broad plate glass windows. The quiet street in front, where she used to walk their kids when they were small. Now it loomed with possibility. She spent the next hour poring over online records, property tax, sale price history, zoning maps, even original architectural sketches from the 1960s. It looked worn, but solid, surrounded by cafes and foot traffic, but undervalued. She realized this could be her project, her stake in something tangible. Her pulse marched fast. She thought of the spare room again, the one she'd opened earlier, the sewing machine gathering dust, the table piled with paints she once used. She had breathed life back into that small corner of her house. Now she could breathe new life into that building, claim space beyond domestic invisibility. Sarah cleared her throat, stepped outside and lingered at her front door, then returned, paused at the counter with pen hovering above a notebook. She wrote her first plan: contact agent, visit site, evaluate financing, explore partner options. Each board sealed a shift from passive support to active creator. Back inside, she opened her laptop and drafted an email to a local real estate agent. She wrote clearly and simply, "Hello, I'm interested in the building at 14. Could we arrange a meeting? Thank you, Sarah Reeves." She hesitated before hitting send. The email struck heavier than any message she'd sent in years. Outside, her children stomped downstairs to get ready for school. She paused at the top of the stairs and waved at them, offering warmth instead of apology or hesitation. She told them breakfast would be slightly late. She smiled, grounded, present. Later, Daniel re-entered the kitchen, dressed for work. She met him at eye level. "I emailed about the Elm building," she said. "I want to explore it." He paused, surprised. He didn't argue, not immediately. He simply nodded. She nodded back. When he left, she stayed at the table. Her laptop pinged moments later. "Thanks for contacting me. I'll call tomorrow to schedule a tour." Her chest tightened, not from fear but from hope. That afternoon, Sarah kept working. She cataloged her art supplies, cleared the corner of the desk that had been unused for years. Later, she walked the neighborhood of Elm Street, eyes lifted to architectural details she never noticed before: stained glass, wrought iron balconies, age-worn stone. She imagined how she might restore it. Margot messaged her, "Drink later? I want to hear everything." Sarah texted back, "Yeah, I'll call." She closed the journal and sat in the spare room, sunlight painting dust motes in the air. She found her old sketchbook, flipped to a blank page, and tested strokes of paint again. Sarah leaned over the sketchbook, her hand steady, full of trembling, quiet energy. The email to the agent shone in her inbox, waiting unread. At that moment, everything she'd held inside for years, dreams, doubts, possibilities, made sense. She had begun, and that was enough. When the agent called, I could hardly believe it. The building was within reach, and now I had to make the decision to go through with it. The phone rang at 9:03 a.m., not too early to be impolite, not too late to be forgettable. Sarah stared at the screen. Paul Carmichael, real estate. Her heart picked up. She steadied her breath, wiped her hands on her jeans, and answered. Paul's voice was warm, practiced and clear. "We're good to go if you want to see the property today." An hour later, Sarah stood in front of the brick building she'd passed 1,000 times without ever noticing. Now it was all she could see. Paul opened the door and let her inside. The air smelled like old paper and hope. It was worn, yes, scuffed floors, yellowed paint, humming fluorescence, but it had structure, and bones, and light, lots of light. She walked each corridor slowly, her fingers brushing the ridged wall as Paul explained the basics: square footage, plumbing updates, the estimated property tax. His voice faded beneath the thump of her own thoughts. She was no longer just looking, she was measuring. Back at her kitchen table that afternoon, Sarah surrounded herself with spreadsheets, loan calculators, and notebooks. She had her modest savings, some wiggle room with credit, and if she truly committed a shot at a small business loan, the risk was enormous, the margins, but the potential, it was real. For the first time in decades, she considered betting everything on herself. She closed her eyes and pictured it: warm paint on the walls, local artists' work hanging in the lobby, a small coffee counter tucked in the corner, Maybe even a workspace for creatives like her, women who'd once folded dreams into laundry piles and now wanted to unfold them again. This wasn't just an investment. It could be her story, rewritten in brick and glass and hardwood. When she met Paul again that week, something inside her had already changed. She was less hesitant, more precise. He noticed. "You thinking of renting it out?" he asked. "Or something else?" Sarah smiled. "Something else," she said quietly. "Something mine." He nodded like he understood. Back home, she scoured city archives for the building's original floor plans. She called zoning offices and asked questions she didn't know she had the courage to ask. She mapped her skills, organization, community ties, design instincts, and began to believe that she could in fact make this work. She didn't tell Daniel yet. This wasn't a rebellion, it was a resurrection. By Friday, she sat across from a business consultant named Elaine, a woman who ran 3 companies, and wore bright blue glasses like they were armor. "So," Elaine said, flipping through Sarah's printed documents. "You're serious?" Sarah nodded. "I am." Elaine smiled. "Then, let's build it like you mean it." The following days blurred with planning, projected costs, branding notes, startup timelines. Sarah outlined a vision board on her dining room wall, moving post-its around like chess pieces. Her hands moved with new certainty. Her voice grew firm. Each list she wrote sounded less like a fantasy and more like a business plan. Late one night, she sat alone in the spare room, soft jazz playing from her phone. She looked around, the sewing machine cleaned and rethreaded, her sketches pinned to the wall, fabric samples stacked in neat piles. She felt something between exhaustion and joy, the kind of peace that only comes after movement. The next morning, she returned to Paul's office with a signed offer letter. Her palms were slick with sweat. Her voice didn't shake when she said, "Let's do." He reviewed the papers, smiled, and said, "Welcome to the next chapter." Sarah left the office with the contract tucked in her bag, the city breathing around her. The building wasn't hers yet, not officially, but she had taken the step, and she knew the hardest part wasn't money. It was daring to believe that her life could belong to her again. "I thought I had everything figured out," but then the building owner dropped a bombshell. It wasn't for sale anymore. The morning Sarah expected to seal her future began with sun streaking across her breakfast table, and the hum of possibility in her chest. She had rehearsed her next steps a dozen times: walk into Paul's office, sign the final documents, and step fully into the version of herself that no longer asked for permission. But at 8:43 a.m. Paul called first. "Sarah," he said, his voice brittle, "we have a problem." She paused halfway through buttering toast. "What kind of problem?" "The building. It's off the market. The owner, Mr. Thompson, changed his mind late last night. He's pulling the listing." Silence fell like a dropped plate. Sarah pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "What do you mean pulled? We were days away." "I know. Believe me, I'm just as blindsided." He said something about wanting to keep it as an investment. Said it wasn't the right time. Sarah lowered the phone, stared blankly at her coffee. The steam still curled, oblivious to the fact that her dream had just slammed into a wall. After Paul hung up, she sat still for a long time. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in, pressing against the breath in her lungs. This building had become more than real estate. It was her reclamation, the visual proof that she wasn't useless, that she could still build something that was hers. She walked to the vision board in her dining room, its colorful sticky notes. Suddenly her eyes landed on the first card she'd pinned. "Claim your space." She ripped it off the wall, stared at the words, then slowly set it down. Then something shifted. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fury, but something surged up and steadied her spine. If the building wasn't available, maybe it just hadn't been offered to the right person yet. She didn't call Paul. She went straight to her laptop, typed Clifford Thompson, Elm Properties LLC into a search bar, and started digging. 2 articles, 3 interviews, 1 dated photo, then a business number, then a receptionist, then hold music. When Mr. Thompson's voice came on the line, it was deep and distracted. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah Reeves. I'm the one who submitted an offer on the Elm building. I understand it's off the market, but I want to." He gave a long sigh. "The market's unstable. I don't need the risk." "I understand, but I don't think this is about the market. I think this is about timing, and I think I'm the person who can make this work for you and for me." She told him about her plans, briefly but firmly. The restoration, the tenant spaces, the community hub she envisioned. He listened in silence, then said, "You sound invested." "I am." There was a pause. Then, finally he said, "It's not really off the market. I've just been waiting to see who'd come back and fight for it. The last buyer walked at the first no. You didn't. Sarah's breath caught. I'll reconsider, he said. But the price just went up. Sarah didn't flinch. Send me the numbers. They hung up. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing like it did the day she got her first acceptance letter from art school. That hadn't felt real either. The new price came through 2 hours later, stretching her finances to the edge. She called Elaine, the consultant, and ran the number. They could make it work. Barely. If she was careful, if she was brave. That evening, she sent her revised offer. By morning it was accepted. Sarah stood outside the building as the sun rose over the city's skyline. The brick facade gleamed. The windows blinked with morning light. This time, it wasn't a maybe, it was hers. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, letting the morning air settle over her skin. She'd won the fight, but a new one loomed. The building was just the beginning. Now she had to make it real, and this time, failure wasn't an option. Now that the building was mine, I felt both empowered and terrified. It was no longer just a plan, it was real. Sarah signed the final paperwork with a hand that trembled, not from fear but from the weight of change. Paul slid the folder across his desk, nodding quietly as he passed her the keys. They jingled like a bell in a quiet church. She closed her hand around them and exhaled. This wasn't just a building, it was a beginning. She drove straight there, parking in the narrow side lot where faded lines barely held shape. The brick exterior looked sun-drenched. Steady, she paused at the entrance and pressed the key into the lock. It clicked. When the door swung open, dust swirled in a beam of late morning light. She stepped inside. The space smelled of old paper and time. It was empty, but not lifeless. The scuffed floors and cracked molding whispered of stories, of potential. Her heels echoed as she walked from room to room, trailing fingers along the wall. She imagined fresh paint, warm lighting, the murmur of conversations over coffee. Her dream had a heartbeat now. Back home she spread out her renovation folder at the dining table. She began calling contractors, emailing Rosa, the no-nonsense general contractor Elaine had recommended. Rosa responded within an hour, already asking about budget and timelines. Sarah jotted everything down on yellow legal pads, highlighting what she didn't yet understand. She wasn't pretending, she was learning. Daniel passed through the kitchen later, sipping his espresso like always. You've been on that laptop a lot lately, he said casually. She smiled. I've got a few things in motion. He didn't press, he never did. That night, Sarah lay awake replaying everything, the financial risks, the permits, the possibility of it all falling apart. But even her fear felt different now, less like drowning, more like swimming out too far and still deciding to go further. By morning she was back at the building, meeting Rosa out front. The woman walked the property briskly, pointing out weak spots in the roofline, outdated wiring, hidden value in the original fixtures. It's got bones, Rosa said. You ready to do something with them? Sarah didn't hesitate. Yes. They set a tentative start date. 4 weeks later that afternoon, Sarah sat in her car outside the building, watching the sun hit the upper windows just right. The place didn't look perfect, it looked possible. She called Elaine to confirm financing. Everything was tight, but manageable. If she skipped the mural she wanted and did some of the sanding herself, it could work. Barely, but that was enough. Back at home, the kids worked on homework. Daniel scrolled through emails. Sarah moved quietly among them, a small smile on her lips. None of them knew, not yet. She wanted to wait until there was something to show, something undeniable. She cleared off the old sideboard in the hallway and laid out her sketches, floor plans, color swatches, photos of the building taped above them, her new command center. She'd build this dream in full view. The next morning, she returned to the property, this time alone. She unlocked the door and stepped inside with slower steps. The air inside was still cool, quiet. She imagined foot traffic, shared stories, the sound of music drifting through upstairs window. This space would hold more than drywall and decor. It would hold pieces of her that had been buried for years. She walked through the back hall, stopping at a window that overlooked the alley. The sun hit her reflection in the glass. She studied herself, noticing the confidence in her posture, the way her hand rested on the keyring like it belonged there. She took one long breath and said aloud, "Let's get to work." Sarah turned to face the front lobby, dust catching in the morning light. With each step forward, the weight of what she had taken on settled deeper into her bones. The dream was no longer theoretical. The walls were hers, the floor was hers, the risk was hers. Now came the real test. Could she build something that would last? Renovating the building wasn't just about fixing walls, it was about building myself up again. Sarah stepped through the dusty doorway with a notebook in one hand and blueprints in the other. The building groaned around her, pipes echoing, wood creaking under her steps, but she didn't flinch. Rosa followed behind, clipboard in hand, already rattling off repair estimates and scheduling notes. They walked the perimeter together. Water damage here, faulty wiring there, but beneath the mess, Sarah saw more than cost. She saw potential. "Keep the crown molding," she said, running her hand over the chipped plaster. "It has character." Rosa gave a small grin. "You got a vision." "I do," Sarah said simply. Back home, she laid swatches and notes across the dining table. She color-coded timelines and circled high-priority items. She'd never managed a renovation before, but her instincts sharpened daily. She stayed up late researching materials and watching tutorials. She asked questions, took notes. She didn't pretend to know everything, but she didn't pretend to be small anymore either. The first contractor crew arrived that week. Sarah greeted them with coffee and printed plans. She answered their questions, asked better ones, and took their input seriously. They started demo on Monday. As walls came down, something in her stood taller. The building wasn't just changing, it was coming alive, and so was she. Daniel remained largely unaware. He asked vaguely about her afternoons. She replied vaguely in return. He was still buried in quarterly reports and business calls. She didn't tell him about the cafe counter she'd penciled into the layout, or the open gallery space she'd added on the second floor. That part was hers. Each day brought new progress and new fatigue. She balanced school drop-offs, meal prep, permit forms, flooring samples. Her body ached, her thoughts raced. But she was moving forward, and that momentum felt better than rest. One night, sitting cross-legged in the spare room, she called Margot. "I didn't think it would be this hard," Sarah admitted. "Or this emotion." "You're building more than walls," Margot said gently. "You're reclaiming space in the world, and in yourself." Sarah stared at the ceiling, letting those words settle. She felt the truth in her spine. The next morning, Sarah met Rosa again They reviewed electrical plans and walked through the second floor. As Rosa stepped into the stairwell to take a call, Sarah lingered alone in the main hallway. The light streamed in just right, catching on the edges of exposed bricks. She imagined the walls painted in soft earth tones, community artwork hanging proudly, voices laughing over espresso, a space for collaboration, for women like her to create something lasting, not quiet, not temporary. She walked the floor slowly, hand trailing the wall. That afternoon, the first problem hit. Rosa's text came during dinner. Supplier delay, main doors backordered, minimum 5 weeks. Sarah froze. The doors were critical. Without them, inspections stalled. Without inspection, opening dates shifted. Revenue, bookings, the mural artist, all delayed. She pushed her plate aside and walked outside. The air was sharp. She breathed it in like medicine. Inside, the project waited. The vision board, the contractor notes, the possibility. She called Rosa. "What are our options? We could swap for a lower grade, or we hold the schedule and rework the rest." Sarah closed her eyes. "We hold, we rework. I want this right." She hung up. No panic, no tears, just the growing understanding that building something from scratch meant setbacks and courage. She sat on the porch as evening turned to night, her fingers curled around her coffee mug. Steady now. She'd faced bigger disappointments and survived. This wasn't failure, it was construction. Sarah looked out into the dark, the outline of her building, just barely visible beyond the rooftops. A delay, yes, but not defeat, she whispered to herself. Not a vow, just a truth. We keep going. And the night nodded back. Just when I thought I could handle everything, Daniel showed up at my door with a demand. Sarah had spent the morning mapping out seating layouts in the lobby. By afternoon, she carried paint swatches and contractor quotes, her confidence solidifying like concrete. So when Daniel's knock came loud, insistent, she paused mid-note, heart fluttering briefly. She opened the heavy glass door. Daniel stood on the threshold, his suit crisp, his face tight with something raw. "I'm coming in," he said. His tone was icy. She stepped aside silently and closed the door behind him. The building hummed with half-worked silence, walls stripped bare, footprints in the dust. She offered him a seat on the plywood stairs. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked immediately, voice low. He took in the sound of hammering echoes and saw her sketches pinned to the wall. This is ridiculous. Sarah met his eyes. It's mine. His face darkened. You made me the joke of my office. I talk budgets and projections. You go buying real estate behind my back. Her chest tightened momentarily as betrayal flickered. She thought he'd understand, thought he'd be proud, but his gaze was disappointment with a ready sting. I'm not undermining you, she said softly. I'm creating something of my own. He stood abruptly. Your own or our money destroying. This isn't about your ego, Sarah said, rising. Her heels clicked on rough wood. It's about my life. Daniel scoffed. You think this building protects you. It won't. It'll crumble financially. She interrupted him. Your success isn't my measure. He stepped toward the blueprint table, ripping off a corner of the sketch outlining the coffee counter. You're wasting money. Sarah held her chin high. I'm investing it. The corridor echoed. Dust clung in beams of light. She felt her resolve sharpen. He crossed his arm. What happens when this fails? His voice cracked slightly. Fear. Anger. She answered without hesitation. Then I'll rebuild. Part of her flinched at the words, but she kept still. This conversation was her moment. Daniel's expression flickered. Anger, worry, disbelief. He took a shaky breath. This isn't rational. He spat. You're sabotaging what I've built. Sarah stepped forward. What you built never included me. I've built something now, something that includes me. She saw his jaw clench. In that moment, the building felt brighter, filled with her name and her purpose. He turned sharply and stalked toward the lobby door. Wait, she called softly. If you want me to fail, then leave. But don't expect me to come crawling back. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, but said nothing, then stepped out. The door thudding closed behind him. Silence rolled in like a wave. Sarah sat on the stairs for a long moment, breath steadying. The afternoon sunlight cut across the entrance in golden line. She closed her eyes, shudders of fear shaking inside her. When she reopened them, the lobby looked different. Not dusty, not just property. It looked like proof. Proof she could stand alone. Proof she could walk through confrontation and remain upright. Still, unease settled under the rising conviction. She had faced him, but what had she lost? Sarah crossed the dusty floor toward the auctioned wooden ledger table, sunlight flickering across its surface. Daniel's departure echoed in her ears, not as victory, but as warning. The building stood silent, so did she, but beneath the tremor in her chest lay steel. She whispered into the quiet, "We'll see what comes next." I thought I knew what I was doing, but then a call came in that turned everything upside down. The call came at 10, just as Sarah was reviewing lighting specs with Rosa. Her phone buzzed across the blueprint table. City zoning office. The screen read. She excused herself and stepped into the back hallway. Mrs. Reeves. The voice on the line. We've reviewed the submitted renovations for 14 Elm Street. We have a zoning flag. As it stands, that building isn't permitted for mixed commercial use. Sarah's stomach dropped. I don't understand, she said slowly. The previous owner ran multiple businesses here. The voice was apologetic but firm. Technically, it was grandfathered under an older code. That status expired with the sale. To open new facilities, especially food or retail, you'll need to apply for a zoning variance. Sarah leaned against the cool plaster wall. The breath left her body in a slow collapse. What does that process look like? It involves application, city council review, community notices. It can take months. After she hung up, the silence of the hallway pressed in. The walls, once full of possibility, now pulsed with red. Back in the lobby, Rosa looked up. Everything okay? Sarah nodded too quickly. Just red tape, she muttered. I'll handle it. That afternoon she barely heard the hammering or sawdust chatter. Her mind looped the phrase, zoning flag, months, variant. By evening, she sat in her car outside the building, fingers locked around the steering wheel. Doubt coiled in her chest. She'd spent weeks chasing this dream. Contractors, permits, courage, and now a single zoning clause threatened to unravel it all. Back home, the house bustled around her. Kids talking over homework. Daniel on another loud phone call, but she felt adrift. She walked into the spare room and shut the door. Margot picked up on the second ring. You sound winded. Sarah exhaled. Zoning issue. Serious one. There was a pause. Are you going to fight it? I don't know. Maybe I got ahead of myself. No, Margot said firmly. You just finally stepped into yourself. That scares people. Systems too. Sarah stared at her plans pinned across the wall, all the careful outline, all the color-coded hope. The next morning, she met with a zoning attorney named Quinn. He was brisk, mid-30s, dressed like he hadn't slept. "It's fixable," he said, "but it's uphill. You'll need public backing, city board approval, maybe even press." Sarah blinked. "Press? Council responds to pressure. If enough people want this space, we build the narrative, but you'll be the face of it. Every question, every doubt, they'll point it at you." She left his office feeling both seen and exposed. The building waited for her like a half-told story. She stepped inside slowly, each footfall echoing louder than usual. Her eyes scanned the space she'd dreamed of. The gallery, the cafe, the laughter, all now paused beneath legal uncertainty. In the center of the floor she stood still, letting the silence rise around her. This wasn't just about permits. It wasn't about square footage. This was about whether she would keep letting people or systems decide what she could do with her life. She walked to the window, pressed her hand to the cold glass. Outside, the city moved without her. Inside, her heart beat a little louder. She turned back toward her files, pulled out the zoning documents, and began making notes. She drafted a letter, then a second. She texted Rosa, slight delay, "Don't worry, we're not stopping," then called Quinn again. "I'll do it," she said. "You sure?" he asked. "No," she replied, "but I'm in." As Sarah filed her application for a zoning variance, the office buzzed with low voices and flickering fluorescents. Her hands trembled slightly on the paperwork, but her signature was clean and sure. She stepped into the corridor, pulse steady. The battle ahead wasn't one she asked for, but now it was hers. Fighting for the building wasn't just about legalities. It was about proving to myself that I was worth something. Sarah sat in the back of the city council chamber, hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had rehearsed her statement 100 times, but now the words felt like fragile glass. Across the room sat officials in pressed suits, clipboards in hand, already flipping through reports. The overhead lights hummed above her like a verdict waiting to fall. Her name was called. She stood slowly, smoothing her jacket, and walked to the podium. Behind her sat community members, some strangers, some who had signed her petition, and Margot, whose eyes gave her the smallest nod. "Good evening," Sarah began, her voice quieter than intended. "My name is Sarah Reeves. I'm the new owner of 14 Elm Street, and I'm here to request a zoning variance to allow mixed commercial use." She paused. The council waited. "I bought the building to create something more than retail," she continued. "I want to build a space that serves people, an art gallery, a cafe, a collaborative workshop. It's not about profit, it's about purpose." One of the councilmen leaned forward. "Miss Reeves, you're aware this building falls under restrictive zoning? Mixed use hasn't been permitted here in over a decade." "I'm aware," she said, "but the neighborhood has changed. The community has changed, and I believe our zoning policies should reflect that." Another official asked about parking, another about waste management. Sarah answered with clear numbers, backup plans, and quiet confidence. She handed over letters of support from neighboring businesses, a map of proposed traffic flow, a copy of the petition signed by 60 local residents. They nodded, took notes, but offered no expression. When she returned to her seat, Margot squeezed her hand. "You were solid," she whispered. Sarah's hands still trembled. Outside the chambers, the air felt heavy with unspoken judgment. But as people filtered out, several approached her. "I hope they approve it," one woman said. "It's time someone did something meaningful with that space." Back at home, Daniel raised an eyebrow over his wineglass. "So you're lobbying city council now?" She poured herself water, unfazed. "I'm advocating for my work." He chuckled. "What's next, Mayor?" Then turned back to his phone. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. The week passed in a blur of follow-up. Sarah visited nearby businesses, collected new signatures, and prepared a packet to send back to the council with added documents, blueprints, timelines, even testimonials from mothers, artists, and retirees who wanted the space built. She called Quinn for legal updates, checked in with Rosa on renovation scheduling, and met with Elaine, her consultant, who said plainly, "If anyone can push this through, it's you." Each meeting brought fresh pressure, but Sarah felt her footing strengthen. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was her fight to claim something long denied. Then 2 days before the vote, she received the formal notice. Variance hearing, June 4, 6 p.m., council chambers. She hung the notice in her building's entryway, just above the exposed stuff, taped beneath it, in bold red ink, "Be there. Bring others." The night of the vote, Sarah returned to the council hall, the same notebook in hand. Margot stood beside her, the chamber filled with neighbors, small business owners, and community members, who had come because she'd asked them to. As the meeting began, her name appeared again on the docket. She stepped up to answer final questions. Her hands no longer trembled, her voice didn't waver. Council members murmured. Then came the moment. The city council will now vote on the variance request for four. Sarah watched as the council chair adjusted his microphone. His eyes swept the room. All those in favor, hands began to rise. Sarah's breath caught. This vote wasn't just about bricks and permits. It was about her right to exist, fully, loudly, and on her own. The night before the city council vote, I felt both hopeful and terrified. It was now or never. Sarah sat alone in the spare room, the soft glow of a desk lamp spilling across blueprints and petitions. Her hands hovered above the edge of the zoning file, not moving. The house was silent, Daniel asleep, the kids tucked in, but her mind raced louder than traffic. She thought of the girl she used to be, careful, quiet, always editing herself to fit a version someone else had built. Now here she was at the edge of something she never believed she'd touch. She ran her fingers across a swatch of textured fabric she'd picked for the cafe booths. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just about council votes or architectural drawings. It was about the pieces of herself stitched into every inch of this place. If they said no tomorrow, would that part unravel? She didn't know, but she'd still show up. Morning came with pale light and a cup of coffee she barely touched. She pulled her hair back, clipped on simple earrings, and wore the navy blazer that made her feel like someone who didn't need to ask for permission. At City Hall, the air felt heavier. Familiar faces filled the room. Margot, Rosa, local artists, even two baristas from the coffee shop down the block. Quinn gave her a nod from the side bench. The council chair cleared his throat. Final agenda item, zoning variance request for 14 Elm Street. Sarah stood. The vote was procedural, but her heart thundered. All in favor, hands rose, one by one. 4, 5, 6. The chair looked around. Motion passes. The gavel hit wood, and just like that it was real. The applause came quickly, polite, warm, not thunderous but full. Sarah sat back down, her throat tightening. Margot leaned in, grinning. "You did it." Sarah couldn't speak. She nodded, tears glassing her eyes but refusing to fall. Later, in the hallway, Quinn clapped her on the shoulder. "Now the real work begins." And she smiled through it. Good. That night, back at home, Daniel looked up from his laptop. "You got it?" he asked, tone flat. "I did." He nodded once. "Guess you're officially in business." Sarah didn't respond. His indifference no longer hurt. It just didn't matter. She went upstairs, made herself a tea, and sat at the edge of her bed, smiling at nothing. She slept with the zoning approval tucked beneath her pillow like a secret only she could fully understand. The next few days were a flurry. Rosa called to confirm demo could resume. Elaine sent over launch timelines and budget adjustments. Emails poured in. Local vendors offering samples. Artists asking about the gallery space. A community paper requesting an interview. Sarah answered them all. Her momentum was different now, no longer fueled by rage or desperation, but by purpose. She walked taller, spoke clearer, laughed more. Daniel, meanwhile, became quiet. One evening, as she outlined a mural plan on the kitchen island, he paused beside her and said, "This really matters to you, doesn't it?" She looked up. It always did. He nodded, but it felt like they were no longer speaking the same language, and she was finally okay with that. A week later, Sarah stood outside the building's double doors, sun on her back and a key in her palm. A clean banner hung across the scaffolding. "Coming soon. The Foundry. Coffee. Art. Community." People passed and smiled. A teenager peeked through the glass. Rosa's truck rolled up the block. Sarah inhaled deeply, eyes lifting toward the second-floor windows, now cleared and gleaming. Inside was still dust, still noise, still work, but it was hers. Sarah stepped forward, unlocking the door with a single quiet click. The threshold felt sacred beneath her shoe. She looked around the half-built space and whispered, "Let's begin." The future was unwritten, but finally it was hers to write. The wedding was supposed to be a day of celebration, but it ended up being the day I realized just how far apart Daniel and I had grown. The summer light filtered through stained glass windows. As Sarah entered the church, she wore the navy blazer she'd bought for business meetings. Simple, confident, but something in her chest felt hollow. Wedding bells followed. Guests smiled. Daniel stood beside her for a moment, surveying the space, distant and silent. Sarah realized she didn't feel celebrated. She felt unseen. They found their seats. Jenna, radiant, waited at the altar. Sarah's heart ached quietly, not for nostalgia but clarity. This ceremony, joyous as it was, underscored how long she'd been standing next to someone who no longer recognized the voice beside him. During vows, Daniel shifted next to her. She glanced over. His face was polite, detached. They locked hands, the gesture automatic, but the grip lacked heat. At the reception, guests danced and laughed around her. She stood near the bar watching toasting speeches, floral arrangements, bridesmaids, launching into a practiced chorus. Daniel spoke to acquaintances, arms animated. Sarah listened from the familiar pang. She'd been the one always orbiting him, prioritizing his world, but now she felt guest at her own table of life. When Jenna called Mom and hugged her tight, Sarah's throat tightened with two emotions, fierce pride and loneliness. She hugged back. "Congratulations," she whispered. Jenna's eyes shimmered. "Thank you for everything." Later, Sarah and Daniel stood on a quiet terrace. Lights twinkled overhead. The party pulsed within. They half smiled at each other, but the space between them felt heavier. "Beautiful day," Daniel said, sipping champagne. "Yes," she replied softly. "It is." He glanced at her. "Whatever you want next, you have the confidence now." Her stomach dropped. That sentence, meaningful, loaded. She realized he acknowledged her growth, but from afar, not walking it with her. She looked at him, the familiar face now strange. "I'm thinking hard about that," she said. He nodded. The air crackled with unsaid words. She left him where he stood, and returned inside. The band played. Families mingled. She watched laughter. She watched movement. She realized she wanted to move differently. Back home that night, the wedding video played on auto reverse in her mind. She unpacked her heels slowly, smoothing her dress. Daniel didn't ask if she was fine. She didn't volunteer. In bed, she stared at the ceiling. Her heart pulsed with quiet revolution. She had built wings, but no longer for him. The next morning, she poured herself coffee and sat at the kitchen island. Daniel hovered near, loading cream. "I need to talk," she said. He paused. "Okay." She laid papers on the counter, legal forms, plans, property deeds, symbols of a life she no longer contained to his rules alone. "I've accepted that we've grown apart," she began. "I respect what we've built, but I don't want to stay static. I didn't choose this building because I knew I'd outgrow my marriage. But maybe I have." He inhaled. Silence between them felt seismic. They spoke then, not loudly. Words came steady, Sarah's voice firm. "I love what I'm becoming. I'm not blaming you. I'm just done shrinking." He looked at her, softened. I didn't realize you felt that small." She nodded. "Maybe I stopped needing permission to matter." She left the papers for him to consider. No fight, no tears, just inevitable respect. Outside, light softened. She gathered her things. She felt a strange clarity, as though stepping into air she'd never breathed before. They hadn't arranged a divorce yet, but the line had been drawn. One path moved toward shared memory, the other toward independence. Sarah packed her laptop, her journal, keys to Elm Street. In her wrist, a pulse of truth. Sarah stood in the half-light of morning by the front door. Behind her lay a wedding she'd attended, not as a wife, but as someone finally seeing herself for who she'd become. Ahead, a life of her own design. And though she didn't know where exactly it would take her, she felt certain this chapter had been earned. Everything has changed. But now, I'm in control. And that's all that mattered. Sarah sat at the edge of the dining table, papers spread neatly in front of her, divorce documents, building plans, vendor agreements. The early morning sun caught the edge of her teacup, casting an amber circle across the page. Daniel stood nearby, silent. He hadn't read the forms yet. "I've made my decision," she said calmly. "This isn't about blame. It's about truth." Daniel looked at her, stunned. "You're really doing this?" "I already did," she replied. "Now it's just paperwork." For once, there was no argument, only the growing awareness between them that the chapter had closed long before either of them said the words. She packed quietly that afternoon, filling 2 boxes with essentials, her sketchbooks, a set of mugs, a favorite blanket. Daniel didn't stop, he just watched, arms crossed, the kitchen clock ticking like a metronome behind them. "Where will you go?" he asked. "To my building," she said. For now, she left without ceremony, no tears, no regret, just the steady sound of her shoes against the hardwood, and the door clicking shut behind her. The foundry greeted her like a promise. The brick exterior still bore traces of construction dust, but the name stretched boldly across a fresh banner. Inside, the smell of sawdust and coffee beans lingered. Rosa nodded from behind a paint-streaked ladder. "We're close." Sarah dropped her bags beside the front counter space. Her new life didn't come with a welcome mat. It came with a floor plan and a vision. She turned the upstairs loft into a makeshift home. Air mattress, lamp, stacked books beside an unplugged coffee maker. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She took a deep breath, then pulled open her laptop and typed the subject line for the grand opening invites. "Come see what we've built." The next few days passed in a blur. She reviewed the final menu design, confirmed deliveries, and edited press copy for a local feature. Vendors dropped off displays. Artists arranged pieces along the gallery wall. Each task felt intentional, empowering. At night, Sarah sat by the wide upstairs window, sipping tea, watching the neighborhood light flicker below. She no longer wondered what Daniel thought. His silence wasn't cruel, it was distant, and she had finally stepped beyond its reach. Margot arrived on Thursday with a bag of fresh scones and a set of hand-lettered signs. "It's a beginning," she said. Sarah nodded. "One I chose." They worked late arranging final touches, setting tables, testing light dimmers, folding program. Sarah paused in the center of the space, listening to the quiet hum of the espresso machine being tested. It sounded like a heartbeat. She stood later that evening at the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other gripping the shop keys. Across the street, people walked past, glancing in curious. Some smiled, some pointed. Her banner fluttered softly in the wind. This moment had no soundtrack, no confetti, just peace and certainty. She returned upstairs, unrolled a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote in large, even strokes, "I choose this life, not out of spite, not out of fear, but because it's mine." The note stayed tacked above her desk, a reminder, a vow. On Friday morning, she lit candles at every table. The launch was set for tomorrow. Ribbon cut, doors open, faces welcome. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the flower vases. But the tremor wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. She stood back, took in the glow of the new space. Wood floors polished, chairs aligned, gallery wall, alive with color. As Sarah flipped the small wooden closed sign to "Open soon," she paused for just a moment at the threshold. Behind her was everything she'd walked away from. Ahead of her, the dream she'd built with steady hands. The night before her grand opening, she smiled to herself, heart calm. Tomorrow, the world would see what she already knew. She had become the woman she was always meant to be. Just when I thought everything was falling into place, I received news that threatened to derail everything. The call came on Tuesday morning, as Sarah arranged fresh flowers in her newly opened cafe. Margot hovered, hopeful. Sarah's phone buzzed. Paul Carmichael. She opened it. Her breath hitched. "Daniel wishes to meet." Urgent. A knot formed in her stomach. She closed her eyes. Now or never. That afternoon, Daniel showed up at the foundry. The building buzzed with guests, contractors, and Sarah greeted him with measured calm, though every nerve pulsed. He blew past greetings. "You need to hear this," he said, voice low. "I've arranged a buyout offer on Elm Street with investors ready to move in next week." Sarah faltered. Her world had not prepared her for stealth betrayal. "Why?" she asked. He stared at the mural plan pinned behind her. "Our kids need security, a legacy. You're unproven. They deserve stability." Heat spread through Sarah's chest. This wasn't about love or logic. It was control dressed as protection. She walked him through the empty gallery upstairs, pointing to chalk marks where tables and displays awaited. "This is more than a building," she said softly. "It's my life." Daniel shook his head. "It's ours. Ours as a family. I'm doing what I think is right." His tone cracked behind him. She realized, he truly believed her independence endangered everything he stood for. "Untrue," she replied. But if you want to buy me out, you'll do it publicly. You'll file with the council and with the courts. His eyes flickered. You'll take me to court. She looked around at cafe lights still muted beneath scaffolding. Yes, I'd lose. And they'd lose me. That night, Sarah lay awake in the loft space she'd claimed above the shop. Pain sharpened beside pride. She'd rebuilt her self-worth nearly solo. Now it was under threat by the man who said he'd married her. She opened her laptop and drafted emails to her lawyer, to Elaine, to community supporters. Daniel's behind-the-scenes offer. I need counsel. I need backup. Her hands trembled, but her voice steady. Next morning she met Rosa, among dropcloths and paint cans. Trust me, Sarah asked. Rosa nodded. They'll see what they built. They just don't know it yet. Sarah met her gaze. She had allies. She had conviction. Over coffee with legal counsel, she pieced together her strategy. Public filing, community objection to Daniel's attempted takeover, protective business structure. She realized she'd have to leverage every relationship, every letter, every friend. At dinner, Daniel sat across in polite distance. He spoke of their children's college, the costs, the responsibilities. Sarah replied, quietly but clearly, I have those responsibilities, and I'm still here. Don't define me as dispensable. Later, she stood in front of the foundry's glass facade. The banner flapped quietly. She placed her palm on the glass. Light filtered through her name, her identity. She whispered, I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, her phone pinged. A message. Court hearing. Your filing moving forward. Daniel's action filed as opposition. Her breath caught. The fight had begun. From the scaffolding above she could see the lobby below. Clean lines. Future cafe tables. Art pieces waiting for frames. Hers. She pressed record on her journal app. He's trying to back out his fear through money. But I backed in through conviction. This fight might cost everything. But without it, I lose myself. Sarah turned from the window toward her empty gallery. The city street hummed beyond. She clasped her hands behind her to steady her. Contracts and court notices lay open on the counter, stark against coffee stain. She breathed, steadying herself against the moment she never planned for, and the battle she'd chosen. Tomorrow, they'd face each other in court, and she would stand unbroken, unbound, unmistakably herself. This was it, the final test, but I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. The courthouse lobby buzzed with silent tension. Sarah hugged her jacket against her chest as she entered, sunlight filtering through tall windows, casting long lines across marble floors. She spotted Margot dressed in crisp black, clipboard in hand, and offered a faint smile. This ends today, Margot whispered. Sarah nodded, throat tight. Inside her was a storm of fear and fierce resolution. Courtroom seats filled fast. On one side, Daniel and his high-powered legal team. On the other, Sarah, her counsel Quinn, and chairs reserved for community supporters, artists, cafe workers, neighbors, faces she'd come to know in recent weeks, each one a testament to her resolve. The judge entered, papers rustled. The hearing began. Daniel's attorney presented first. Smooth tone, rehearsed lines. Mrs. Reeves' claim undermines Mr. Thompson's authority as landlord. His investors acted in good faith. The building belongs to the Reeves-Thompson partnership via verbal agreement. Sarah watched, stomach knotting, as lawyers referenced plans, emails, back-channel negotiations. She felt the weight of betrayal settle in her chest. Margot leaned in from the front. Stay with me, she said. Quinn stood to cross-examine. His questions were precise. Did Mr. Reeves ever formally invest capital or sign documents related to the building? Were there partnership agreements? Under oath, Daniel shifted. We discussed intentions. I offered financial support, he said. Quinn held up bank statements. No transfers. No signed contract. No documented equity. The courtroom seemed to inhale. Sweet tension dripped with implication. Nothing Daniel claimed was legally binding. Next came Sarah's turn. She stepped to the stand, shoulders squared, voice calm. Mention the truth, Margot had said. So she did. I came in with eyes open, Sarah began. But I rely on documents, not promises. I built credit, contracts, community support. I wasn't contemplating a takeover. I was creating something tangible with my own resources. She showed letters, tenant support, neighborhood petitions, press coverage. She spoke of how the space served mothers, artists, women without a voice. She talked not of money, but of value. Behind her, the judge took notes. The final rebuttal was Daniel's lawyer hinted at the emotional damage. Mrs. Reeves put personal emotion above family. We caution against rewarding impulsive decisions at the expense of partnership unity. Maria, one of the cafe staff, backed up Sarah before being dismissed after giving testimony. She spoke of the local buzz, the kids' workshops, the monthly art nights, lives touched. The judge's face remained inscrutable. Then came the verdict. Sarah felt upright calm, as the judge peered over glasses. I find for the plaintiff, Sarah Reeves, he said. All claims by Mr. Reeves and associated parties are dismissed. The foundry remains under Mrs. Reeves' ownership, fully operational per zoning Relief crashed into her chest, followed by the sharp taste of victory's solitude. Supporters clapped softly. Margot planted a gentle embrace. Quinn nodded. Daniel sat rigid, silent. He would not meet her eyes. Out in the hallway, community supporters encircled. Some cried, others beamed quietly. She inhaled deeply, processing that what she had just earned was bigger than comfort. It was respect. Back at the foundry, twilight cast the lobby in golden warmth. Sarah switched off construction lights. Dust motes drifted in the final rays of sun. Silence pulsed between boards and blueprints. She stepped to the center. The space pulsed with promise again. She exhaled. That evening, Daniel's lawyer delivered formal paperwork dissolving any claims under their marital finances. They wouldn't officially divorce today, but the final bond on this building had been cut. Sarah placed the papers atop the ledger desk, as if laying a brick. She unlocked the front door, stepping inside as dusk deepened. A single cafe light glowed, inviting. She flipped the sign to open. Sarah paused at the center of the empty cafe, lone spotlight overhead. The judge's ruling hung on the wall, unquestionable. Outside, evening traffic hummed. This room was hers. But the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And as the front doors opened wide to what she built, she whispered into the empty bustle, "This is the real beginning. I've fought for this, for my family, for my freedom, and now I'm living the life I've always wanted." Sunrise flooded through the foundry's skylight, illuminating the gallery wall, the cafe counter, the reclaimed wood floors. Sarah turned the wooden sign from "Open Soon" to "Open." The quiet hum of espresso machines and laughter from early customers filled the space like a familiar song. It felt like home finally. She wandered between tables where local artists arranged their prints and neighbors sipped their first cups. By midday, the barista, Maria, handed her a blueberry scone. "On the house," she said. Sarah smiled, tasting it slowly and warmly. Daniel never came. He had the legal paperwork but not the courage to enter. It didn't matter. He'd tried to wrest control and failed. His presence or absence no longer weighed on her. Instead, her children bounded into the cafe after school. They slid into a booth, beaming. "Mom, people love your business." They took photos. They told her, their excitement stitched into her chest, reminding her why she fought for them. For example, for possibility, she hosted an afternoon workshop. Local mothers teaching ceramics, students sketching in the law. People who had once stood outside doing these things leaned into the space. Sarah created. She circulated, helping someone hang a painting, checking inventory, listening. Her heart moved through the crowd, glad and anxious. Later, she stepped into her loft studio upstairs, where sunlight and her sketchbooks rested. She found her old journal pages titled "Dreams," many once crossed out. She read, "Open a design studio, invite women to create art." She closed it and tucked it back into her supplies. That's history now. Business was gaining traction. Elaine called with an invitation to speak at a local women's entrepreneurship conference. More media inquiries followed. How did a homemaker become a visionary business owner? They wanted her story. She replied, "Because I finally chose." Younger entrepreneurs stopped by for advice. A recent art school graduate asked how she financed the build. Another asked about interns. Sarah paused, then said, "Trade sweat, honesty, community, that's your capital." They laughed, scribbling notes. The building pulsed around her. The gallery, the cafe, the front patio where ideas and people overlapped. Conversations about next steps rose. Evening reading groups, weekend markets, commissioned mural. She sketched a new vision board on her wall. Annual open studios, rotating exhibits, community mural nights. That evening, as golden light fell across wooden beams, she sat drinking tea by a corner window. The street outside carried children riding home, neighbors calling good evening. The foundry glowed behind her. There was no ache for what she left behind, only pride in what she gained. In her personal life, Something had shifted. Lighter, Margot joined her for supper at a small table in the cafe. They toasted cider glasses. To you, Margot said. For Rise, Sarah grinned. To all of us breaking free. One morning, Daniel texted, "Lunch? Our children miss you." She paused by the glass door, then typed back, "They know where I am." She didn't close the door on them. They always had access, but she closed something else. The part of herself that needed permission. Before bedtime, Sarah paused at her framed mission statement, printed above the counter. Build space. Build community. Build myself. She smiled. It wasn't enough to survive. She built something new. Something root. Something that would outlast her. As dusk settled, she switched off the cafe lights, leaving soft ambient bulbs glowing. Alone in the lobby, Sarah walked quietly between tables, pausing at art prints pinned above the mural she loved. That wall had once been cracked concrete. It now held color, stories, possibility. She placed a hand over the patched wall and whispered, almost to herself, "We made it." Sarah stepped out onto the sidewalk beneath the cafe sign illuminated at night. The building held her name. Her phone lit up with messages. A press pickup. A community invite. A volunteer offer. She inhaled the crisp evening air. The world had not changed for her. It had shifted because of her. And as she locked the door behind her, she felt a quiet certainty. She had everything she needed. Now the future was hers to shape.